July 19, 1945. The northern waters off Karafuto were unusually calm. From a concealed position beneath the surface, the American submarine USS Barb lay motionless near Patience Bay. Inside the conning tower, her commanding officer, Commander Eugene Fluckey, leaned into the periscope. What caught his attention was not a ship, not a convoy, but a faint ribbon of smoke drifting upward from the distant coastline. Moments later, a sound carried across the water, the steady mechanical rhythm of a steam locomotive. Somewhere along the narrow strip of land where mountains pressed close to the sea, a train was moving. Its cars were loaded with Japanese soldiers and war material, following tracks that clung tightly to the shoreline. For most naval officers, the sight would have meant nothing. Trains were land targets. Submarines hunted ships. Fluckey thought differently. As he studied the scene, an idea took shape, one so unconventional that no naval manual had ever imagined it. What if a submarine didn't just fight at sea? What if it reached onto land and struck there? In that instant, Fluckey committed to a course of action that defied every accepted rule of undersea warfare. For the first time in history, a submarine would attempt to attack a train. By every measure, the plan bordered on absurd. Submarines existed to operate unseen beneath the waves, launching torpedoes at enemy vessels and vanishing into deep water. They were not designed to insert men onto hostile shores, let alone to sabotage rail infrastructure inside enemy territory. Such missions belonged to commandos and spies, not submarine crews. Yet Fluckey was no ordinary commander. By mid-1945, he was already the most successful and decorated American submarine captain in the Pacific. His reputation had been built on daring, adaptability, and a willingness to challenge rigid doctrine. Under his leadership, the Barb had repeatedly done what submarines were never meant to do and survived. Over the previous months, Fluckey and his crew had transformed the Barb into something entirely new. She had fired rockets at land-based targets, slipped into harbors believed to be unreachable, and escaped situations that should have ended with her destruction. Time and again, conventional limits had been ignored and rewritten. The mission now forming in Fluckey's mind was simply the next step. Still, the contrast between intent and design could not have been sharper. The USS Barb was a Gato-class submarine, commissioned on July 8, 1942. From bow to stern, she measured 311 feet 9 inches, displacing 1,526 tons while surfaced. Her armament reflected her true purpose: 10 torpedo tubes, 6 forward and 4 aft, stocked with Mark 14 torpedoes, engineered exclusively to destroy ships. Power came from 4 diesel engines producing 5,400 horsepower, enough to drive her at over 20 knots on the surface. Submerged, electric motors pushed her through the depths at nearly 9 knots. Everything about the Barb was built for stealth, endurance, and lethal precision beneath the ocean's surface. She was a predator of the deep, designed to strike silently and disappear. Nothing in her blueprint suggested inflatable rafts, shore landings, or demolition charges carried by sailors creeping across enemy beaches. And yet, that was exactly what Fluckey intended to do. His willingness to abandon rigid thinking had deep roots. The Barb's story began years earlier in Groton, Connecticut, where she was constructed by the Electric Boat Company. She was one of 77 Gato-class submarines, vessels that would eventually form the backbone of the United States undersea campaign against Japan. Her early service, however, gave little hint of future legend. Initial patrols were conducted far from the Pacific, in the Atlantic and Mediterranean theaters. Across 5 war patrols, the Barb searched for Axis blockade runners with limited results. These missions were routine, cautious, and largely uneventful, the opposite of what the submarine would later become. But by the summer of 1945, routine no longer applied. Now, off the coast of Karafuto, Fluckey stared through his periscope at a moving train. A target no submarine commander before him had ever seriously considered. Doctrine offered no guidance, precedent offered no reassurance. Only imagination and audacity remained. And with that, naval warfare was about to change, not in the open ocean, but on a thin strip of rail hugging a distant enemy shore. Long before official reports reflected it, senior leaders in the U.S. submarine force had begun to suspect what the crews of one particular boat already understood. USS Barb possessed untapped potential. The submarine was not flawed, its leadership had been. What it required was a commander capable of pushing beyond convention. That commander arrived in the spring of 1944. Eugene Bennett Fluckey was born in Washington, D.C. on October 5, 1913. He entered the United States Naval Academy during the interwar years and graduated on June 6, 1935. His early naval career followed a conventional path: service aboard surface vessels followed by submarine duty. Prior to joining Barb, he had already commanded another submarine, USS 42, gaining valuable experience beneath the waves. Fluckey later attended the Prospective Commanding Officer School in New London, Connecticut. There, instructors quickly noticed his mindset. He questioned assumptions, challenged rigid procedures, and favored bold, decisive action. His reputation for aggressive and unconventional thinking unsettled more traditional officers, but it also marked him as someone capable of redefining submarine warfare. At just 30 years old, Fluckey assumed command of his second submarine, USS Barb, on April 27, 1944. From the outset, he brought with him something more potent than torpedoes or deck guns, a refusal to see doctrine as a boundary. To Fluckey, regulations were guidelines, useful but never sacred. The crew sensed the difference almost immediately. They nicknamed him Lucky Fluckey, a blend of humor and genuine belief. Some credited the name to the improbable escapes he orchestrated. Others felt that serving under him was like winning a survival lottery. Dangerous, yes, but paired with extraordinary success. Barb's first war patrol under Fluckey departed Midway Atoll on May 21, 1944, heading north toward the frigid Sea of Okhotsk. Within days, it became clear this would not be a routine mission. On May 31, Fluckey engaged a Japanese convoy and sank two cargo vessels, Koto Maru and Madras Maru, in a single coordinated attack. 2 days later, while under intense depth-charge assault, Fluckey executed one of his most audacious maneuvers. Instead of retreating to deeper water, he guided Barb into drifting ice fields, concealing the submarine among pack ice. It was a maneuver few commanders would have attempted, and none had previously dared in combat conditions. On June 11, Fluckey surfaced to confront two enemy trawlers directly, engaging them with deck gunfire. After submerging, he finished the action with torpedoes, sinking the fishing vessels Chihaya Maru and Toten Maru hours apart. 2 days later, with only 2 torpedoes remaining, he used both to destroy a passenger cargo ship, leaving Barb completely expended but victorious. The submarine returned to Midway on July 5, 1944, credited with destroying 15,472 tons of enemy shipping during a single patrol. For the crew, something fundamental had shifted. They were no longer simply submariners executing orders. They were participants in a quiet revolution beneath the sea. Each patrol that followed reinforced that transformation. During Barb's 9th war patrol in August 1944, Fluckey operated as part of a coordinated wolf pack alongside USS Queenfish and USS Tunny in the South China Sea. On August 31, the 3 submarines intercepted a heavily defended Japanese convoy. While Queenfish initiated the attack, Fluckey maneuvered Barb through the confusion, launching torpedoes that struck both a tanker and a freighter. Later in the engagement, an unexpected obstacle appeared. A seabird repeatedly landed on Barb's periscope, blocking Fluckey's view at a critical moment. Rather than rush the shot, he waited calmly until the bird flew off. Only then did he fire 3 torpedoes into the freighter Okuni Maru, splitting the ship apart. In mid-September, between the 15th and 16th, Barb received orders to assist in rescuing Allied prisoners from a Japanese transport that had been sunk. While racing toward the rescue area, Fluckey encountered another enemy convoy. His response reflected his entire philosophy of command. Instead of bypassing the convoy to reach the survivors, he attacked. 6 torpedoes from Barb sent the 11,700-ton tanker Isuzu to the bottom. Shortly after midnight on September 17, 3 additional torpedoes struck the 20,000-ton escort carrier Unyo. The carrier, one of only 4 Japanese aircraft carriers ever sunk by American submarines, capsized and sank later that morning at approximately 7:55 a.m. Only after the attack did Fluckey proceed to the rescue zone. There, Barb's crew pulled 14 British and Australian prisoners from makeshift rafts tossed by violent typhoon-driven seas. Sailors took turns diving into treacherous waters, risking their own lives to save men who had been adrift for days. Yet it was Barb's 11th war patrol that would define Fluckey's legacy. Departing Pearl Harbor on December 19, 1944, the submarine headed toward the Chinese coast. On January 1, 1945, Barb destroyed several small Japanese vessels using surface gunfire. A week later, on January 8, Fluckey initiated a 2-hour running night engagement in the Formosa Strait. During the battle, Barb torpedoed and sank Shinyo Maru and Sanyo Maru. After resurfacing, Fluckey identified another target, the passenger ship Awa Maru. 3 torpedoes slammed into the vessel, triggering a catastrophic explosion. The blast was so powerful it was felt nearly 4,000 yards away. Shards of metal rained down from the sky as if from a storm of steel. Unbeknownst to Barb's crew at the moment of impact, the ship was transporting large quantities of ammunition. The detonation transformed the night into daylight, marking one of the most violent explosions ever caused by a submarine attack. By the end of that patrol, Eugene Fluckey had secured his place in history. He would be awarded the Medal of Honor, and USS Barb would earn its reputation as the most aggressive and dangerous American submarine of the Pacific War. In the early hours spanning January 22 to January 23, Eugene Fluckey reached a conclusion that most naval strategists of the era would have dismissed as reckless, if not fatal. Intelligence had revealed that over 30 Japanese merchant vessels were concealed inside Namquan Harbor along the Chinese coastline. The location was notorious among submariners, a confined basin ringed with defensive minefields, treacherously shallow water, rocky hazards, and constant surface patrols. Entering such a harbor went against every established principle of submarine warfare. Standard doctrine was clear submarines were to strike from the open sea and avoid fortified anchorages at all costs. Fluckey disagreed. After carefully examining charts and coastal features, he made his decision and calmly informed his crew that they would penetrate the harbor itself. The attack would rely on absolute darkness. There would be no moon, no navigational markers, and no margin for error as they passed through waters that had never been properly mapped, all while enemy patrol craft moved nearby. By this stage of the war, Fluckey's crew placed unwavering confidence in their commander. They had already witnessed him turn improbability into routine success. Shortly before dawn on January 23, at approximately 402 hours, USS Barb slipped into Namquan Harbor. The water beneath them was so shallow that the submarine's keel came dangerously close to scraping the seabed. With deliberate precision, Fluckey guided the boat around Japanese warships, positioning Barb roughly 3,000 yards from the clustered merchant fleet. Every detail of the escape had been calculated in advance. Once the attack began, survival would depend on a rapid withdrawal at maximum speed through mined waters while under fire. When Fluckey finally issued the command, the submarine unleashed its full striking power. 10 torpedoes were fired in quick succession, 6 from the forward tubes, followed instantly by 4 from the stern as Barb executed a hard evasive turn. 8 of the torpedoes struck their marks, hammering 6 separate ships in a series of massive detonations that tore through the harbor. Official post-war records confirmed only a single sinking. But reports from Allied coast watchers indicated that as many as 4 vessels were actually destroyed. Almost immediately, the harbor erupted into chaos. Japanese patrol boats surged toward the attack point. Coastal artillery batteries opened fire. Searchlights cut through the darkness, and aircraft were rushed into the sky. Fluckey ordered maximum power. Barb's engines were pushed to an extraordinary 150% of their rated capacity, propelling the submarine to 23.5 knots, an unprecedented underwater speed that would remain unmatched for years. Inside the boat, the crew felt the hull shudder violently as depth charges detonated behind them. Surface ships fired relentlessly, and an enemy aircraft appeared overhead just as Barb reached deeper water. With only seconds remaining, Fluckey ordered an emergency dive. The submarine vanished beneath the surface moments before the attack could close in. For this operation, the audacious penetration of Namquan Harbor and the escape that exceeded every known limit of submarine performance, Eugene Fluckey was awarded the Medal of Honor. The citation highlighted his exceptional bravery and leadership in the face of extreme danger. USS Barb also received a Presidential Unit citation. Yet Fluckey's influence on submarine warfare was far from complete. One final patrol remained. As preparations began for Barb's 12th war patrol in June 1945, Fluckey submitted a request that once again defied convention. He asked for rocket launchers to be mounted on the submarine's deck. By now, naval authorities had grown accustomed to his unconventional ideas and approved the proposal. Engineers installed a 5-inch rocket launcher on the forward gun mount, capable of elevating to 45 degrees. The system could fire 12 Mk-10 spin-stabilized rockets simultaneously, each nearly 4 feet long, carrying a 10-pound explosive charge and capable of reaching targets almost 3 miles away. Fluckey referred to the weapons as ballistic missiles, even though no formal doctrine existed for submarine-launched rockets. On June 8, 1945, Barb departed Pearl Harbor carrying 72 rockets and a commander intent on proving that submarines could strike shore targets without relying on traditional deck guns. The crew suspected that this patrol would bring further surprises. Barb entered the Sea of Okhotsk on June 21 and immediately commenced operations unlike anything previously attempted in undersea warfare. In the early hours of June 22, Fluckey positioned the submarine roughly 1 mile offshore from the Japanese town of Shari on the island of Hokkaido. The town's population of around 20,000 slept unaware as Barb surfaced in the darkness at approximately 230 hours, more than 5,000 yards from shore. The launch order was given. 12 rockets roared into the sky, arcing toward the town's industrial district. They struck factories and infrastructure, causing structural damage but igniting no large fires. Japanese defenders initially assumed they were under aerial bombardment. By the time the true nature of the attack became clear, Barb had already submerged and withdrawn. It marked the first successful use of submarine-launched rockets against land targets in naval history. However, Fluckey's campaign was not over. Over the following weeks, Barb carried out an aggressive series of operations along the Karafuto coast, reflecting Fluckey's belief in relentlessly pressuring the enemy. On July 2, the submarine shelled the garrison on Todoroki Island with deck guns, destroying installations and setting fires. 3 days later, torpedoes from Barb sank the merchant ship Sapporo Maru near Odamari Harbor. On July 8, the submarine's guns destroyed a small tug in the Lapperouse Strait. Additional actions followed. Barb attacked sampans with gunfire, sank trawlers, and launched further rocket strikes against coastal towns including Shikuka and Shiratoru. Each engagement followed the same disciplined formula: surface under darkness or early light, deliver sudden and overwhelming firepower, then vanish before the enemy could organize a response. By the end of its final patrol, USS Barb had redefined what a submarine could achieve. Under Eugene Fluckey's command, it had crossed boundaries once thought impossible, leaving a legacy that permanently reshaped the concept of undersea warfare. By the final year of the Pacific War, Japanese naval commanders had begun whispering about a strange menace they could never quite pin down. American submarines, they believed, were appearing out of nowhere, striking without warning and dissolving back into fog and darkness before a response could be mounted. Sailors gave this invisible threat a name: the Ghost Submarine. Behind that reputation stood commanders like Eugene Fluckey of the USS Barb. Patrol after patrol, Fluckey proved that even as Japan tightened defenses around its home waters, American submarines still moved freely, unchallenged and aggressive. The assumption that Japan's coastal zones were secure was rapidly becoming a dangerous illusion. On July 19, during one of these late war patrols, Fluckey noticed something through the periscope that would push his already unconventional thinking into entirely new territory. As the Barb lay submerged off the coast of Karafuto, he observed a train traveling along a railway that traced the eastern shoreline. The tracks ran close to the water in several stretches, threading together small towns across southern Sakhalin. This railway was not a civilian line in any meaningful sense. It carried troops, equipment, and supplies to Japanese forces still entrenched along defensive positions, bracing for the Allied invasion that everyone on both sides knew was inevitable. Fluckey began to study the scene carefully. The train schedules appeared regular. The terrain offered multiple points where a submarine could surface at night without drawing immediate attention. In several places, the tracks passed so close to the coast that the sea itself seemed to shadow them. As these details came together, Fluckey's thoughts moved toward an idea so radical that no naval doctrine addressed it because no one had ever tried anything like it. Submarines were designed to hunt ships, but what if a submarine could strike land targets directly? What if, instead of torpedoes, it delivered men ashore? And what if those men didn't attack a base or a harbor but a train? In other words, could the USS Barb destroy a railroad train from beneath the sea? When Fluckey presented the concept to his crew, reactions varied widely. Some were thrilled by the audacity of the plan, others struggled to believe it could be done at all, but one man didn't hesitate. Chief of the boat Paul Golden Saunders, known to everyone as Swiss, stepped forward immediately. Saunders was the most seasoned submariner aboard, having sailed on every one of the Barb's 12 war patrols since her commissioning. He understood both the danger and the opportunity, and he volunteered without reservation. Others followed. Electrician's mate Billy R. Hatfield also raised his hand, bringing with him an unusual qualification. As a boy, Hatfield had spent time along railroad tracks, entertaining himself by placing walnuts between the ties and watching the immense weight of passing trains crush them effortlessly. That childhood memory would soon become the key to solving the most dangerous problem of the entire operation. In truth, nearly the entire crew volunteered. Fluckey, however, was selective. He established firm criteria. He chose only unmarried men, believing it unjust to risk leaving families behind if the mission failed. He favored sailors with Boy Scout experience, reasoning that those trained in navigation, fieldcraft, and outdoor survival would stand a better chance if separated from the group. Above all, he wanted men capable of staying calm, thinking clearly, and adapting when plans inevitably went wrong. From dozens of eager volunteers, Fluckey selected 8 men: Paul G. Saunders, Billy R. Hatfield, Francis Neil Siver, Lawrence W. Newland, Edward W. Klingsmith, James E. Richard, John Marcus, and Lieutenant William M. Walker. Planning began immediately, but one obstacle threatened to derail the mission before it even started. How would the explosive be detonated? The initial concept was simple but deeply flawed. One man would remain hidden near the tracks, waiting for a train to appear, then manually trigger the charge. The dangers were obvious and severe. The saboteur would need to evade Japanese patrols, find concealment with a clear line of sight, guess the train's timing, detonate the explosion at precisely the right moment, and then escape through enemy territory to a shoreline where the Barb might or might not still be waiting. The odds of capture or death were unacceptably high. It was then that Hatfield recalled his childhood experiments with walnuts and rails. He explained that when a heavy train passes over tracks, the steel rails flex downward ever so slightly under the load. That movement, though small, was consistent and predictable, especially between 2 ties. Hatfield proposed using a microswitch positioned beneath the rail, calibrated so that the natural sag caused by the train's weight would close an electrical circuit. The train, in effect, would trigger the explosion itself. No man would need to remain ashore. The landing party could plant the device, return safely to the submarine, and allow gravity and physics to do the rest. Fluckey immediately recognized the brilliance of the idea. It was elegant, efficient, and dramatically reduced the risk to his crew. Just as important, Hatfield possessed the electrical expertise to build such a mechanism himself. What had once seemed impossible now became merely extraordinarily dangerous. The USS Barb quickly transformed into a makeshift weapons workshop. Submarines were not equipped with digging tools, so the crew improvised. Engineers cut steel plating from the lower engine room, reshaping and welding the metal into functional shovels and picks. Hatfield assembled a 55-pound demolition charge by combining a scuttling charge with 3 batteries, sealing the entire system inside a watertight container. The micro-switch demanded painstaking precision. If it was too sensitive, vibrations from wind, wildlife, or shifting ground could trigger it prematurely. If it was too rigid, even the weight of a fully loaded train might fail to activate it. Hatfield tested the device repeatedly, adjusting tension and alignment until he was confident it would perform exactly as intended. Every component of the operation was built using materials already aboard the submarine, a testament to the ingenuity that had defined the Barb's service under Fluckey's command. While the crew prepared the equipment, Fluckey continued reconnaissance. Over 3 consecutive nights, the Barb surfaced offshore under cover of darkness. From the periscope, Fluckey observed the railway closely, confirming schedules, studying patrol patterns, and identifying the most promising stretch of track. The stage was set for one of the most unconventional operations in naval history. An attack no one had imagined a submarine could carry out. Careful observation of the coastal railway revealed a pattern. Freight trains appeared at largely regular intervals, most often hauling between 12 and 20 rail cars. Movement was concentrated during daylight hours, with traffic thinning noticeably after sunset. This predictable rhythm offered a rare tactical advantage. Equally important was the geography. Several points along the shoreline allowed a submarine to move to within roughly 950 yards of land without the danger of grounding. From the water's edge, the beach rose gradually toward a railroad embankment located about 400 yards inland. Dense trees and thick vegetation lined the route, providing natural concealment for any approach from the shore. The surrounding terrain also offered multiple paths of withdrawal should enemy patrols be encountered. After weighing these factors, Commander Eugene Fluckey chose the site as the ideal landing zone. Only one variable remained beyond human control: the weather. The success of the operation depended heavily on cloud cover. The submarine needed concealment as it surfaced, and the landing party required darkness and low visibility to move undetected. For 4 tense days, the crew waited. Fluckey monitored the sky relentlessly, knowing that clear conditions would force a delay they could not afford. The USS Barb was nearing the end of its 12th war patrol and was scheduled to return to Midway by August 2. Each passing day increased the risk that the mission would have to be cancelled altogether. On July 22, subtle changes appeared in the sky. High cirrus clouds gathered above the coastal mountain range, followed by lower stratus clouds clinging to the peaks. The signs were unmistakable. A weather front was approaching. The long-awaited cover was finally arriving. Fluckey made his call. The operation would move forward that night. Just after midnight on July 23, 1945, the Barb surfaced approximately 950 yards off the coast of Karafuto. In the darkness, the vessel's outline blended easily into the night, resembling the small patrol craft and fishing schooners commonly seen in those waters. The crew worked with deliberate silence as 2 inflatable rubber rafts were eased into the sea, fully aware that even minor noise could carry far across the still surface. 8 men descended from the deck, each burdened with essential gear. They carried a 55-pound explosive charge, a microswitch detonator, batteries, makeshift digging tools, and personal weapons intended only for last resort defense. Fluckey briefly considered offering a stirring farewell, something worthy of cinema. But standing before the men who were about to become the only American ground combat unit to operate on Japanese home territory during the war, his instincts turned practical. His advice was simple and stark. If escape became necessary, head north towards Siberia, roughly 130 miles away, using the mountain ranges as guides. He wished them luck. The raft slipped silently toward shore, taking about 25 minutes to cross the distance. As land came into view, the team realized their navigation had been slightly off. Rather than an empty stretch of coast, nearby houses were visible. No dogs barked, but footprints, both human and canine, marked the sand, confirming the presence of civilians and increasing the risk. They hauled the rafts onto the beach and pushed inland without delay. Darkness shielded them from sight but made orientation difficult. Familiar reference points had vanished during the approach, forcing the men to pause and recalibrate their bearings. Every step through unfamiliar hostile territory demanded intense concentration. They waded across shallow streams, forced their way through heavy vegetation, and climbed the gradual rise toward the railway embankment. The combined weight of the explosives and equipment slowed their pace. In the stillness of night, even the smallest sounds seemed magnified: the crack of branches, leaves brushing against clothing, the steady rhythm of their own breathing. After advancing roughly 400 yards inland, they reached the railroad tracks. The most critical phase now began. Using their improvised tools, the team started digging between two railroad ties, carving out a cavity large enough to hold the explosive charge and its power supply. The ground proved far more compact than expected, resisting every stroke. Progress was painfully slow, and the pressure of time weighed heavily on them. The work had to be finished, the site concealed, and the team back aboard the Barb before daylight exposed them to discovery. Every minute mattered. As the men worked in near silence, a sound cut through the night and instantly changed everything. Far off in the darkness, the unmistakable whistle of a train echoed across the coastline. Within moments, the noise intensified. A distant light appeared along the tracks, gradually sharpening into the powerful beam of an oncoming locomotive. The sabotage team was not ready. The explosive charge was still being buried, and the microswitch detonator had not yet been installed. 8 men stood motionless, forced into a split-second decision: abandon the mission entirely or conceal themselves and trust that the train crew would pass without noticing anything unusual. They chose concealment. Each man pressed himself into the surrounding brush just a few feet from the rails as the train roared past. The vibration from the engine shook the ground beneath them. Through gaps in the vegetation, they could clearly see Japanese soldiers seated inside the passenger cars, so close that a single glance out a window at the wrong moment would have exposed the entire operation. But the train passed on without incident. Only after the sound had faded completely into the distance did the team move again. The narrow escape sharpened their focus. They had been granted an unexpected second opportunity, and failure was no longer an option. Working quickly, they lowered the explosive charge and battery assembly into the prepared hole beneath the tracks. Hatfield then installed the microswitch detonator, handling it with extreme care. The mechanism had to be placed with absolute precision between two railroad ties. The design relied on the subtle downward flex of the rails under the weight of a passing train. Enough to close the circuit, but not so sensitive that it would trigger prematurely. After making minute adjustments and performing a final inspection of the wiring, Hatfield signaled completion. The device was then buried and carefully concealed. Once finished, the disturbed soil blended seamlessly with the surrounding railbed. From above, there was nothing to suggest that this stretch of track differed from any other along the coast. The mission ashore was complete. Time was now the enemy. Another train or a Japanese patrol could appear at any moment. The 8 saboteurs withdrew swiftly, retracing their route through the darkness toward the shoreline. There, they located the rubber rafts they had hidden earlier, climbed aboard, and began paddling toward the submarine waiting offshore. At 1:32 hours, they signaled that they were leaving the beach. From the submarine, Commander Eugene Fluckey watched the shoreline intently through his periscope. The landing party had exceeded their planned time ashore, and with every passing minute, the risk of discovery increased. The submarine lay dangerously exposed on the surface, unable to dive quickly while men were still in the water. If enemy patrol boats or aircraft appeared, Fluckey would be forced into an impossible choice. Between protecting his vessel and abandoning the 8 men returning from shore. He continued scanning the black water. Then he saw them. 2 small shapes moved slowly across the calm surface. The rafts were coming back. Relief spread through the crew, but the operation was not finished. One final outcome still remained uncertain. The saboteurs were roughly halfway back to the submarine when, at 1:47 hours, the answer arrived. 15 minutes after leaving the beach, a train whistle sounded again in the pre-dawn darkness. Using binoculars, the crew aboard the submarine spotted the glow of a headlight approaching from the north. A locomotive, hauling a long line of cars, advanced toward the exact section of track where the microswitch now lay hidden beneath the rails. The train maintained normal speed, its crew unaware of what awaited them. Silence fell over the submarine as every man watched. The locomotive rolled over the trigger point. For an instant, nothing happened. Then the charge detonated. The explosion was massive. According to Fluckey's later account in his memoir Thunder Below, the engine's boilers ruptured violently. Pieces of the locomotive were hurled nearly 200 feet into the air, racing ahead of a towering column of smoke that shifted from white to black as debris rained down. Rail cars slammed into the wreckage, climbing over one another before tumbling off the tracks in a tangled collapse of metal and wood. Additional explosions followed as cargo ignited, feeding a fireball that lit the coastline with blinding intensity. The blast was bright enough to expose the submarine's position, but any attention from shore was fixed entirely on the destruction of the train. Still paddling toward the submarine, the saboteurs watched in disbelief. Their improvised device had performed beyond expectation. Fluckey immediately ordered over the intercom that all personnel not essential to ship handling were permitted topside. He did not need to repeat himself. Hatches flew open as sailors rushed onto the deck to witness the burning wreckage in the distance. What they were seeing was unprecedented. The submarine USS Barb had destroyed a train. As the vessel withdrew from the coast and headed toward safer waters, the significance of the event became clear. This was not merely an unconventional attack, it was historically unique. It remains the only ground combat action carried out by American forces on territory considered part of the Japanese home islands during the Second World War. The location, Karafuto's southern Sakhalin Island, had been officially designated part of Japan's Naichi, or Inner Lands, in April 1943. This designation placed it on the same status as Hokkaido, Honshu, Kyushu, and Shikoku. In a war defined by vast naval battles and aerial campaigns, this brief, precise operation stood alone. A quiet landing, a hidden charge, and a single train that never reached its destination. For years, American forces had struck Japan primarily from a distance. Cities were hit from the air, and coastal shipping fell victim to submarine torpedoes. Yet despite these attacks, one boundary had remained untouched. No American military unit had ever placed its own men on Japanese sovereign soil to carry out deliberate sabotage. That barrier was finally broken when 8 sailors quietly paddled ashore under cover of darkness. What they achieved had no precedent in the history of naval warfare. This extraordinary moment was the result of Commander Eugene Fluckey's readiness to challenge established naval doctrine. By setting aside traditional limitations and relying on the creativity, courage, and technical skill of his crew, he transformed a risky idea into a historic success. The operation would later be recognized as a defining episode in the evolution of submarine warfare, remembered not only for its daring but for what it proved was possible. Following the landing mission, USS Barb remained on patrol for another week, continuing her aggressive campaign along enemy shores. On July 24, 1945, the submarine deployed 3 rocket barges to strike industrial targets at Shiruri on Sakhalin Island. The following day, July 25, she shelled a cannery at Chiri using her deck guns before launching her final rocket assault against factories at Kashiho. Operations continued on July 26 when Barb attacked the port area of Shiboro on Kunashiri Island. The bombardment destroyed a lumber mill and a sampan yard, further disrupting local infrastructure. During the same action, the submarine rammed a Japanese trawler after setting it ablaze, sinking the vessel and taking 3 additional prisoners. These actions underscored a critical reality. Even in the closing weeks of the Pacific War, American submarines retained the ability to strike freely and aggressively along Japan's coastline. Barb returned to Midway Atoll on August 2, 1945, marking the end of her 12th war patrol. Under Fluckey's leadership during her final 5 patrols, the submarine had survived an estimated 400 enemy attacks, including shells, aerial bombs, and depth charges. Several encounters brought her perilously close to destruction, yet against all odds she returned from every mission intact. Remarkably, not a single member of the crew had been wounded badly enough to earn a Purple Heart during any of her patrols. For his leadership during the 12th patrol, Commander Fluckey received his 4th Navy Cross. Combined with his earlier Medal of Honor, this brought his total to 1 Medal of Honor and 4 Navy Crosses, placing him among the most highly decorated officers in the history of the United States Navy. USS Barb herself was awarded a Navy Unit Commendation for the patrol, adding to the 4 Presidential Unit citations she had already earned. When the submarine returned from combat, her battle flag told a visual story of her achievements. Sewn onto the fabric were symbols marking 17 confirmed ship sinkings, ribbons representing her unit citations, and the Medal of Honor ribbon honoring her commander. Most striking of all was a unique emblem, the silhouette of a Japanese locomotive. No other submarine in any navy had ever earned the distinction of displaying a train on its battle flag. Photographs taken at Pearl Harbor captured the 8 men who had carried out the sabotage mission, standing proudly with the battle flag and smiling at the camera. The image became iconic, symbolizing not just a single daring raid, but an entire philosophy of bold innovation that defined American submarine operations in the Pacific. The operational record of USS Barb under Fluckey's command set benchmarks that illustrated what could be achieved when tactical imagination, advanced technology, and an exceptional crew came together. Between May 1944 and August 1945, during the 5 patrols he commanded, the submarine was officially credited with sinking 17 enemy vessels totaling 96,628 tons. Post-war analysis by the Joint Army Navy Assessment Committee confirmed that these victories included the Japanese escort carrier Unyo, one of only 4 Japanese aircraft carriers sunk by American submarines during the entire conflict. The rest of the tally consisted of cargo ships, oil tankers, patrol craft, and other vessels essential to Japan's war effort. In terms of total enemy tonnage destroyed, Fluckey ranked among the most successful submarine commanders of the war. Yet the true importance of Barb extended far beyond statistics. Her missions demonstrated that submarines were not limited to commerce raiding alone. Under Fluckey's leadership, submarines proved capable of infiltrating heavily defended harbors, escaping at speeds once thought unattainable, launching rocket attacks against shore targets, conducting rescue operations under combat conditions, and deploying landing parties for sabotage missions on enemy territory. Each of these actions forced a re-evaluation of established naval thinking. Lessons drawn from Barb's patrols were gradually incorporated into naval doctrine, shaping how future submarines would be used. Generations of submarine commanders studied Fluckey's tactics, and the aggressive mindset he championed became embedded in submarine force culture. After the war, USS Barb entered the next phase of her life. She was placed in commissioned reserve on March 9, 1946, before being decommissioned on February 12, 1947, at New London, Connecticut. With rising Cold War tensions, she was recommissioned on December 3, 1951, and assigned to the Atlantic Fleet, operating from Key West, Florida. Her service continued until February 5, 1954, when she was again decommissioned to undergo guppy conversion, short for the Greater Underwater Propulsion Power Program. This modernization effort transformed World War II submarines with streamlined hulls, snorkel systems, and improved underwater performance. Following the conversion, Barb was recommissioned on August 3, 1954, serving briefly before being permanently decommissioned on December 13, 1954. Though her active service ended, the legacy of USS Barb endured. She remains a lasting symbol of how bold leadership, innovative tactics, and unwavering crew dedication can redefine the limits of military capability and permanently reshape the history of naval warfare. Following the end of the Second World War, the legendary submarine USS Barb entered a new chapter of her life under the Mutual Defense Assistance Program. As part of this initiative, the vessel was transferred to Italy, where she was commissioned into the Italian Navy under the name Enrico Tassoli. She remained in active service for more than 2 decades, operating until 1972. That year, despite her remarkable history, the submarine was sold for scrap at a price of roughly $100,000. Years later, Admiral Eugene Fluckey would reflect with regret on that decision. He remarked that had the former crew been informed of the impending sale, they would have pooled their own resources to purchase the submarine themselves. Their intention, he said, would have been to return her to the United States and preserve her as a museum ship, ensuring that future generations could learn directly from her extraordinary legacy. Fluckey's professional life continued to advance impressively after his command of the Barb. He went on to serve as an aide to Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal and later to Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, who at the time held the position of Chief of Naval Operations. These assignments placed him at the center of post-war naval leadership during a transformative era for the United States Navy. In June 1964, Fluckey assumed command of the U.S. Pacific Fleet's submarine force. For 2 crucial years, he oversaw all American submarine operations across the Pacific, a responsibility of immense importance during the height of the Cold War. His leadership during this tense period helped shape undersea strategy at a time when nuclear deterrence and intelligence gathering were redefining naval warfare. By July 1966, he was appointed Director of Naval Intelligence, a role that required him to provide high-level strategic assessments during the escalating conflict in Vietnam. His experience as a combat commander informed his intelligence work, bridging the gap between operational realities and strategic planning. 2 years later, Fluckey was selected to lead the U.S. Military Assistance Advisory Group in Portugal. He served in this diplomatic military position until August 1, 1972, when he retired from active duty with the rank of Rear Admiral, closing a naval career that had spanned decades and reshaped submarine doctrine. Retirement did not mark an end to his service-oriented life. In 1974, Fluckey and his wife Marjorie committed themselves to humanitarian work by establishing and managing an orphanage in Portugal. They devoted years to caring for displaced and vulnerable children. That mission continued until Marjorie's death in 1979, following 42 years of marriage. The following year, Fluckey remarried, and together with his second wife Margaret, he continued running the orphanage until it closed in 1982. In 1992, Fluckey documented his wartime experiences in his memoir, Thunder Below. The book provided a detailed account of USS Barb's operations during World War II and offered rare insight into the aggressive tactics and innovative thinking that defined his command style. The work quickly became required reading within submarine circles and a foundational reference for naval historians, ensuring that the story of the Barb would not fade into obscurity. Until the end of his life, Fluckey remained deeply connected to the naval community, regularly attending submarine reunions and participating in discussions about undersea warfare. He passed away on June 28, 2007, in Annapolis, Maryland, at the age of 93. He was laid to rest at the United States Naval Academy Cemetery alongside generations of naval leaders who had shaped American sea power. His death symbolized the closing of a chapter in history, the loss of one of the last surviving submarine commanders whose bold thinking had redefined underwater combat during the Second World War. The 8 men who paddled ashore near Cashiho on that summer night in July 1945 carried the memory of their mission for the rest of their lives, fully aware that they had taken part in an operation unlike any other in American military history. Chief of the boat, Paul G. Saunders, whose steady leadership was instrumental to the mission's success, went on to become one of the most highly decorated enlisted sailors in U.S. Navy history. His awards included 2 Silver Stars, a Bronze Star, a Presidential Unit Citation, a Navy Unit Commendation, a Letter of Commendation with Ribbon for Combat Heroism, the Submarine Combat Insignia, the Victory Medal, and multiple campaign ribbons. Throughout his life, he spoke with pride about his service aboard the Barb and his role in the daring train attack. Billy R. Hatfield, whose childhood experience of placing walnuts on railroad tracks inspired the solution to the mission's most complex technical problem, never forgot the moment when his improvised microswitch detonated the explosive charge beneath the moving train. The remaining members of the landing party, Francis N. Siver, Lawrence W. Newland, Edward W. Klein, James E. Richards, John Marcus, and Lieutenant William M. Walker, returned to civilian life after the war, carrying with them the quiet knowledge that they had achieved something no other American servicemen ever had. As decades passed, historians increasingly recognized the broader significance of the train demolition operation. While U.S. forces conducted countless amphibious assaults and ground campaigns across the Pacific from Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima and Okinawa, those battles were fought on territories Japan had previously seized. Throughout the war, the Japanese home islands themselves remained untouched by Allied ground forces, with a single extraordinary exception. That exception occurred when 8 sailors from USS Barb landed on Karafuto, a region Japan considered an inseparable part of its homeland. There, they planted explosives, destroyed vital enemy infrastructure, and escaped without loss. Although the physical damage inflicted by the destruction of a single train did little to alter Japan's military capacity in the final weeks of the war, the psychological consequences were profound. The operation shattered the belief that Japan's homeland was beyond the reach of American forces, demonstrating that even the core of the empire was vulnerable. In strategic terms, the mission's true value lay not in material destruction but in its symbolic power. An audacious reminder that innovation, courage, and precision could penetrate even the most carefully guarded assumptions of security. By the summer of 1945, Japan was already reeling under the cumulative weight of American air and naval power. Strategic bombing had reduced vast portions of Japanese cities to ruins, crippling industrial production and shattering transportation networks. At sea, the U.S. Navy's blockade, enforced largely by submarines, had effectively cut Japan off from vital resources flowing from its occupied territories. Fuel, food, and raw materials were in critically short supply, and the nation's ability to sustain modern warfare was rapidly collapsing. Despite these realities, Japan's military leadership remained focused on preparing for what they believed would be the final and decisive struggle, a full-scale Allied invasion of the Japanese home islands. Defensive plans called for the mobilization of every available asset, including poorly trained civilian militias, in an all-or-nothing attempt to repel invading forces. In that strategic environment, the destruction of a single railway train would normally have been insignificant, almost invisible amid the broader devastation already unfolding. Yet the true importance of the event lay not in material damage, but in what it represented. When American submariners landed covertly on Japanese soil and successfully sabotaged a train, they demonstrated something deeply unsettling to Japanese commanders. The coastline itself was no longer secure. If enemy forces could slip ashore undetected to destroy infrastructure, then the range of possible threats expanded dramatically. Sabotage, raids, and psychological pressure now had to be considered alongside invasion preparations. Every soldier diverted to coastal security was one less available for the anticipated land battle. The operation achieved exactly that effect. It injected doubt into Japanese strategic calculations and forced military planners to confront scenarios they had previously dismissed as unrealistic. However, because the mission occurred so close to the end of the war, just weeks before Japan's surrender, it has since become the subject of historical debate. Some scholars argue that such risks were unnecessary at a moment when Japan's defeat was all but inevitable. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, a second atomic strike devastated Nagasaki. Almost simultaneously, the Soviet Union entered the war against Japan, launching a massive invasion of Japanese-held Manchuria. These combined shocks shattered any remaining hope within Japan's leadership that a negotiated settlement or prolonged resistance was possible. On August 15, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan surrendered to the Allied powers. The formal signing of surrender documents took place on September 2, 1945 aboard the battleship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, officially ending World War II. Ever since, historians and military analysts have wrestled with a central question. Were the atomic bombings essential to bringing the war to a close, or was Japan already on the brink of collapse due to sustained conventional bombing, economic strangulation, and diplomatic isolation? The Barb's train demolition occurred roughly 2 weeks before the bombing of Hiroshima, placing it squarely within this contentious historical moment. Critics suggest that continuing aggressive submarine missions so late in the conflict exposed American sailors to unnecessary danger. Supporters counter that, until Japan formally surrendered, U.S. forces were obligated to apply relentless pressure using every tool available to shorten the war and reduce long-term casualties. To fully understand the significance of the Barb's actions, they must be viewed within the broader narrative of American submarine warfare in the Pacific. When the United States entered World War II, its submarine force was plagued by severe technical shortcomings. Chief among them was the Mark 14 torpedo, which suffered from a trio of crippling flaws. Its magnetic detonator frequently exploded too early or not at all. The contact detonator often failed upon impact. Compounding these issues, the torpedoes consistently ran deeper than their set depth, passing harmlessly beneath enemy ships. These failures were not fully acknowledged or corrected until late 1943. In the meantime, American submariners paid a heavy price. Attacks that should have destroyed enemy vessels instead exposed submarine positions, allowing Japanese escorts to counterattack. Countless opportunities were lost, and crews were forced to operate under conditions that were not only dangerous, but fundamentally unfair. Even with these disadvantages, U.S. submarines gradually achieved one of the most decisive strategic victories of the Pacific War. By relentlessly targeting merchant shipping, they dismantled the logistical backbone of the Japanese Empire. Oil, rubber, food, and manufactured goods simply could not reach the home islands in sufficient quantities. Post-war analysis by the Joint Army-Navy Assessment Committee revealed the staggering scale of this achievement. American submarines sank 1,314 Japanese vessels during the war, 1,113 merchant ships, and 201 naval combatants, amounting to approximately 5.32 million tons of shipping. This accounted for roughly 55% of all Japanese merchant tonnage lost. In addition, submarines destroyed major warships, including 1 battleship, 8 aircraft carriers, 11 cruisers, and numerous destroyers and submarines. The cost of this success was severe. The United States lost 52 submarines during World War II, 51 in the Pacific and 1 in the Atlantic, representing the highest loss rate of any branch of the American Armed Forces. Of the men who served aboard submarines in combat, nearly 22% did not return. A total of 374 officers and 3,131 enlisted sailors were killed, a casualty rate exceeding even that of Marine infantry units. Those who volunteered for submarine duty understood the risks. Service beneath the sea allowed little margin for error. Mechanical failure, enemy action, or a single navigational mistake could result in the sudden loss of an entire crew. In most cases, there would be no survivors and no recovery of the dead. Within this context, the Barb's raid achieved a lasting symbolic power far greater than its physical impact. Over the decades, the story has been retold in books, academic studies, and documentaries focused on naval warfare. It is taught at the U.S. Naval Academy as a case study in tactical creativity and unconventional thinking. The submarine's battle flag, bearing the silhouette of a destroyed train, has become an enduring icon within the U.S. Navy. It represents the aggressive spirit, adaptability, and audacity that came to define the American submarine force during the Pacific War. At reunions and commemorative events, surviving members of the Barb's crew, especially the 8 men who conducted the only recorded ground combat operation on Japanese home soil, have been honored for their extraordinary service. Today, the Barb's mission stands as a reminder that innovation and courage can reshape the battlefield, even in the final moments of a global conflict. It remains a powerful example of how commanders willing to challenge conventional boundaries, supported by skilled and determined crews, can achieve results that resonate far beyond their immediate tactical value. Submarine operations in the modern era have advanced far beyond the imagination of Commander Eugene Fluckey and the crew of the USS Barb in 1945. Today's nuclear-powered submarines are capable of remaining submerged for months at a time, carrying ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads or long-range cruise missiles capable of striking targets hundreds of miles inland. The deployment of submarine-launched Tomahawk missiles represents a direct evolution of the underwater rocket systems pioneered by Fluckey during World War II, precision weapons capable of destroying specific structures from great distances. These vessels are equipped with electronics and systems so sophisticated that they would have seemed pure science fiction to submariners of the 1942. Despite these technological leaps, the core principles demonstrated by Fluckey and his crew remain remarkably relevant. Successful submarine operations still rely on proactive decision-making, tactical creativity, exceptional crew performance, and the willingness to carry out missions beyond conventional doctrine. The ethos that drove the Barb persists in every submarine operation that challenges the limits of what is considered achievable. After the war, the lives of the 8 men who executed the Barb's daring sabotage, along with the rest of the crew, reflected a broader pattern experienced by millions of American veterans. They had been part of extraordinary historical events, but once the war ended, most transitioned back into ordinary civilian life, raising families, pursuing careers, and rarely recounting their wartime exploits outside the company of fellow veterans who shared those experiences. The courage, ingenuity, and daring that defined their actions aboard the Barb could not easily be transferred to civilian contexts. How could one describe to someone who had never served on a submarine the tension of navigating a dark harbor at night, knowing that even a single misstep could be fatal for everyone on board? How could they convey the mixture of fear and adrenaline experienced while paddling through enemy waters to plant explosives on a railway, fully aware that capture would mean torture or execution? For the most part, the veterans chose silence, speaking only in rare gatherings where they could recount the events to men who had shared the same dangers. The legacy of the USS Barb endures most visibly through its battle flag, preserved at the Submarine Force Library and Museum in Groton, Connecticut. Visitors to the museum can see the train silhouette on the flag and read about the submarine's remarkable missions. This artifact provides a tangible link to a moment in history when 8 men paddled through darkness onto enemy shores to carry out a mission deemed impossible by conventional military doctrine. Looking at the flag, one can envision the scenario: a submarine emerging in hostile waters under the cover of night, rubber rafts being lowered silently, men advancing toward an uncertain fate, the anxious anticipation aboard the Barb, and the triumphant explosion signaling mission success. More than commemorating a single operation, the flag symbolizes the spirit of innovation, daring, and initiative that characterized U.S. submarine warfare in the Pacific. It illustrates the potential unlocked when leaders permit creative problem-solving instead of strictly adhering to established procedures. The story of the Barb's audacious raid on a Japanese train provides lessons that extend beyond military history. It shows that limitations are often self-imposed, rooted more in assumptions than reality. Conventional boundaries of what is possible can be challenged successfully. Technical obstacles can be overcome with ingenuity, and intelligent individuals can achieve remarkable outcomes when given autonomy. Leadership willing to take calculated risks can produce results that cautious, rule-bound approaches could never attain. Commander Fluckey's most enduring achievement was not merely the tonnage sunk or even the Medal of Honor he received. His true legacy lay in demonstrating that submarine warfare was not confined to existing doctrine, that these vessels could accomplish far more than prescribed, and that imagination coupled with courage was the only real constraint on what could be achieved beneath the waves. On July 23, 1945, 8 men disembarked from their submarine, unaware that the operation they were undertaking would later be remembered as one of the most extraordinary in naval history. They were ordinary submariners executing orders from a commander whose judgment they trusted implicitly, embarking on a task that seemed highly unlikely to succeed, but one deemed worth the effort because of their leader's confidence. When the train finally exploded after 147 hours, sending fragments of its locomotive soaring 200 feet into the air, the crew experienced a profound confirmation of their daring. An act once considered impossible, a submarine sinking a train, had been accomplished. This moment would be immortalized in military records, battle honors, historical accounts, and strategic studies, serving as enduring evidence that skill, courage, and ingenuity can turn highly improbable missions into reality. The legacy of the USS Barb extends far beyond the tally of enemy tonnage destroyed or medals awarded. Its true impact lies in the inspiration it provided for subsequent generations of naval personnel confronting seemingly insurmountable challenges. The submarine demonstrated that under capable leadership, these vessels could undertake missions far outside conventional expectations. They were capable of infiltrating heavily guarded harbors once deemed near suicidal, launching rockets against land-based targets, rescuing personnel under extreme weather conditions, and sending men ashore to sabotage enemy infrastructure. Each of these feats expanded the perceived potential of submarines in modern warfare. Commander Eugene Fluckey's philosophy shaped every aspect of the Barb's operations. He maintained that submarines should seize opportunities to strike whenever possible, carefully assessing and managing risk rather than avoiding it outright. He valued the ingenuity of his crew and fostered a climate in which unconventional solutions were welcomed rather than suppressed. Fluckey believed that the most effective defense was often an aggressive offense that kept adversaries uncertain and off balance. The outcomes under his leadership spoke volumes. The Barb sank more enemy shipping under Fluckey than most submarines did over their entire service careers. It completed operations that others dismissed as impossible, survived situations that could have led to catastrophic loss, and remarkably did so without a single crew member falling to enemy action. The relationship between Fluckey and his sailors exemplified the highest standards of naval command. He demanded excellence while providing the authority, resources, and trust needed for his crew to achieve it. Failures were his responsibility, successes were shared. His concern for the welfare of his men was genuine, often bending regulations to reward initiative, reportedly even stocking cases of beer in enlisted showers to celebrate successful missions. In return, his crew demonstrated unwavering loyalty and a willingness to undertake missions that would have appeared suicidal under less confident leadership. The innovative techniques that enabled the train operation reflected the same practical ingenuity that defined all of the Barb's missions. When specialized tools were required, the crew manufactured them from steel plates. Billy Hatfield devised a remote trigger mechanism inspired by his childhood experiences, allowing explosives to be detonated without leaving a man behind. Equipment testing and calibration were performed through repeated trial and error, ultimately achieving the precise sensitivity necessary for mission success. These solutions emerged not from adherence to standard protocols, but from intelligent personnel empowered to experiment and trusted to be taken seriously. The train mission also highlighted the importance of patience and timing in military operations. Fluckey spent 3 nights monitoring the railroad, waited 4 days for ideal weather conditions, and carefully selected a landing party with attention to skills, reliability, and risk mitigation. The operation was planned with meticulous detail, yet retained sufficient flexibility to adapt to evolving circumstances, a hallmark of Fluckey's broader approach to submarine warfare. Beyond its immediate tactical impact, the mission had a significant psychological effect. Japanese commanders, upon learning of the sabotage, were forced to confront unsettling uncertainties. If American submarines could infiltrate and destroy infrastructure on land, what other vulnerabilities existed along Japan's extensive coastline? How many troops would need to be redeployed to defend against unpredictable submarine raids? The uncertainty alone introduced a strategic advantage far exceeding the destruction of a single train. The train operation represented the culmination of the Barb's evolution under Fluckey's command. From a submarine with a largely unremarkable record during its first 7 patrols, it became one of the most aggressive and inventive vessels in the Pacific Fleet. This transformation was not achieved through changes in hardware or crew composition, but through leadership that encouraged creativity and excellence. Fluckey's willingness to attempt operations dismissed by others as impossible cultivated a culture in which innovation was expected and extraordinary achievements became routine. The stark contrast between the Barb's early patrols and its later performance underscores the decisive role leadership plays in operational effectiveness. The submarine itself underwent little modification, yet the mindset instilled by Fluckey allowed her crew to redefine the boundaries of what submarines could accomplish. Through careful preparation, tactical boldness, and a culture of trust and ingenuity, the USS Barb and her crew proved that even the most audacious objectives could be realized. The fundamental skills and technical proficiency of the crew were on par with those of other submarines at the time. What distinguished the USS Barb, however, was the commander's vision of the vessel's potential and his readiness to explore unconventional operations when opportunities presented themselves. This case illustrates a broader principle. Many military units underperform not due to deficiencies in technology or personnel, but because of a limited imagination and reluctance to embrace calculated risks. The extraordinary raid conducted by the USS Barb exemplifies how innovation in military operations frequently originates from those directly engaged in the field rather than from theoretical planners. Standard naval doctrine made no provision for submarines targeting railway lines, and formal education at staff colleges offered no guidance on using submarines for ground-based attacks. The concept emerged solely from a commander recognizing a tactical opening and questioning the assumptions that constrain traditional submarine missions. Throughout history, advances in military practice have often followed this pattern, leaders in the field challenging established norms and pursuing ideas that appear unconventional. The success of the train demolition operation validated Commander Eugene Fluckey's entire approach to submarine warfare. Within the submarine community, some officers had criticized his assertive tactics, suggesting that luck rather than skill accounted for his achievements. The carefully orchestrated sabotage, however, demonstrated that his accomplishments were grounded in meticulous planning, comprehensive preparation, exceptional crew performance, and inventive tactical thinking rather than recklessness. Every element, from the design of the equipment to timing, logistics, and escape strategies, was systematically addressed to ensure success. What seemed impossible in advance reflected prevailing assumptions rather than any true operational limitation. The significance of Fluckey's leadership and the Barb's operations extends far beyond World War II submarine campaigns. Several enduring principles emerge from their service. Leadership that fosters innovation rather than enforces rigid conformity, crews trained to analyze and adapt rather than simply execute orders. The courage to undertake missions outside established doctrine when justified by tactical advantage, detailed preparation paired with the flexibility to adjust plans as circumstances evolve. And an organizational culture that anticipates high performance while normalizing exceptional achievements. These concepts are universally applicable across military contexts, including nuclear submarines, surface combatants, air operations, ground forces, and special operations units. The Barb's legacy persists wherever personnel challenge conventional limits to accomplish missions once deemed unattainable. Every successful special operation, every creative tactical solution, and every commander willing to question whether existing doctrine adequately addresses current challenges embodies the spirit that Fluckey brought to submarine warfare in 1944 to 1945. The story of the submarine that effectively sank a train continues to resonate because it reflects a universal truth about human potential. When individuals collaborate toward a shared objective, when leadership cultivates ingenuity, and when technical obstacles are approached as surmountable challenges rather than insurmountable barriers, extraordinary results become achievable. The small team of 8 sailors who carried out the onshore raid demonstrated that careful planning, courage, and ingenuity could accomplish operations that seemed impossible beforehand. Upon returning from her 12th war patrol, the USS Barb had fundamentally reshaped the understanding of submarine capabilities. The vessel demonstrated that submarines could employ rockets against shore targets, a precursor to modern cruise missile operations. She showed that submarines could penetrate heavily defended anchorages, validating aggressive tactics later studied and replicated by subsequent commanders. The Barb also pioneered the use of submarines in humanitarian rescue missions in conflict zones and proved the feasibility of deploying landing parties for sabotage operations ashore, thereby broadening the operational scope of undersea warfare. Each of these initiatives required not only tactical insight but also the ability to persuade skeptical superiors of the merit of unconventional strategies. Fluckey's ability to gain approval for bold missions reflected the credibility he had earned through consistent operational success. His capacity to clearly articulate the rationale behind innovative tactics, accurately assess and manage risks, and return his crew safely from high-stakes operations distinguished him from less experienced commanders. This relationship between credibility and innovation is a critical feature of military organizations. Novel approaches naturally meet skepticism, and only a track record of demonstrated competence can secure the authority to attempt truly transformative operations. In summary, the USS Barb's service under Eugene Fluckey provides a case study in the transformative impact of leadership, creative problem-solving, and disciplined execution in military operations. The lessons of imagination, meticulous preparation, calculated risk, and fostering a culture of excellence transcend the specifics of technology or era, offering guidance for operational innovation across the full spectrum of military engagements. Eugene Fluckey's development as a submarine commander illustrates a clear trajectory from solid competence to inventive tactical leadership. In the initial phase of his career, he executed standard submarine operations effectively, which earned him a reputation for reliability and skill. This reputation gradually afforded him the freedom to explore more daring strategies. Each successful experiment reinforced his credibility, creating a reinforcing cycle of trust and opportunity that eventually allowed him to undertake operations that might have been considered too audacious for less experienced commanders. Most notably, the unprecedented raid on a Japanese train. When assessing the service record of the USS Barb under Fluckey's leadership, it is essential to place its accomplishments within the broader context of the Pacific submarine campaign. The Barb was one of roughly 25 American submarines that operated in the Pacific during World War II. While its operational record was outstanding, other submarines also attained significant results through bold action and tactical acumen. The distinction lay in the consistency and scope of the Barb's achievements rather than a fundamentally unique capability. What set the Barb apart was its repeated operational excellence across multiple patrols, its innovative tactical approaches successfully applied in combat, and the symbolic weight of missions such as the train raid, which captured public attention and imagination. These achievements were also shaped by structural advantages that many earlier submarines did not enjoy. By the time of the Barb's later patrols, improvements in torpedo reliability, radar and electronic systems, and combat doctrine refined over 3 years of Pacific operations combined with the diminishing capacity of the Japanese anti-submarine forces due to cumulative losses. Submarines deployed earlier faced faulty torpedoes and a more capable enemy. The Barb's record, therefore, reflects not only extraordinary performance but also the cumulative benefits of technological and operational maturation within the submarine force. Recognizing this context does not reduce the significance of the submarine's achievements. Instead, it situates them within the broader evolution of American undersea warfare. The Barb's story exemplifies how military success emerges from the convergence of multiple factors: visionary leadership, skilled personnel, advanced technology, refined doctrine, and favorable strategic conditions. Removing any of these elements could have dramatically altered outcomes. While Eugene Fluckey's command played a central role, the submarine's performance was inseparable from the crew's proficiency, tactical creativity, and the broader operational environment that had been progressively optimized over years of conflict. Beyond its historical record, the USS Barb has captured enduring attention because it embodies themes that resonate beyond strictly military history. Stories of underestimated forces achieving remarkable outcomes, of inventive problem-solving surmounting seemingly insurmountable obstacles, and of disciplined teamwork achieving results unattainable by individuals alone are universally compelling. The image of 8 sailors stealthily navigating toward enemy territory with improvised explosives to execute an unprecedented attack provides a vivid illustration of these themes. The human dimension, the fear, ingenuity, and split-second decisions required adds a layer of resonance that raw metrics, such as tonnage sunk, cannot convey. The Barb's legacy continues to shape the culture of the U.S. submarine force. It demonstrates the value of measured risk-taking, tactical innovation, and crew cohesion. Submarine commanders today still face the choice between conservative, safe operations and audacious actions with greater potential payoffs. The Barb's example encourages officers to evaluate whether standard doctrine is sufficient for contemporary challenges and to consider unconventional approaches when conditions warrant. The train raid exemplifies the broader principle that exceptional military results often require a confluence of leadership vision, operational expertise, technological readiness, and fortuitous circumstances. During her final 5 patrols under Fluckey, the Barb displayed all these elements, producing a record of operational success that ranks among the most distinguished in submarine history. Its story remains a reference point for military personnel, illustrating that with courage, ingenuity, and determined teamwork, missions once deemed impossible can be accomplished. The Barb demonstrates that extraordinary outcomes are rarely the product of individual heroism alone, but emerge from a systemic integration of people, technology, tactics, and context.